Now let's move on to today's perspective, and it's estimated that approaching 300,000 migrants have fled Pakistan since the start of October. Now that's after the Pakistan government announced that 1.7 million Afghans, it says, are living illegally in the country, had just a 1-month deadline to leave. Thousands of people then, some of whom have been living in Pakistan for years, others more recently since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan in 2011, forced to uproot their families once again through fear of facing arrest and forced deportation. Lawyers and activists calling the move unprecedented. With me now is Manon Radosta from the Danish Refugee Council. She joins us live from Kabul on the programme. Thanks very much for being with us. Tell us then what has happened in Pakistan over the last week or so since this announcement was made.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for having me. So, as you know, the Pakistan government has announced around end of September that they would carry out a mass deportation plan that would targeting, as you just said, 1.7 million of undocumented Afghans who are currently living in Pakistan. So the deadline was set for November 1st for all these Afghan people to either vacate by their own means or to risk deportation. And since then, our teams at the border have really seen an alarming increase of Afghans crossing the border, and they all cited their fear as the main reason for the movement back to Afghanistan, trying to beat this deadline.
Obviously terrible looking at those pictures, what that move entails for people on that side of the border. What about when they've crossed the border and got back into Afghanistan? Because life is obviously far from easy there as well.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing at the border is that returnees are in a really, really desperate situation and a difficult situation. Majority of them have to sell their belongings to pay for transportation. They have close to nothing, and they have nothing to return to either. As you said, some of them have been living in Pakistan for decades. Others have been fleeing more recently in the past 2 years, for example, in search for safety. And so they have no land, they have no house to return to. And Afghanistan, we have to remember that they're still reeling for decades of conflict. They have a crippling economy, and they are facing really escalating numbers of natural disasters. If we just mention one, the recent earthquakes in the West have been quite devastating. So there is very little to offer in Afghanistan for these people, and they have very few prospects to survive, so let alone to rebuild.
And of course, that deadline's now expired in Pakistan. Are there reports now of forced expulsions? I mean, how big a problem are you expecting it to be?
We're extremely worried. So since deadlines, we have seen cases of deportation, so by security forces. So forcibly deporting back Afghans to Afghanistan. The numbers are steadily rising. I would say the latest report we had was around 300 cases a couple of days ago, and so we're expecting it to rise. What is important to mention also is that from the testimonies that we got from Afghans who recently crossed the border, is that there's been cases when, for example, a husband has been arrested by security forces a couple of days ago, with security forces telling the family that this person will be deported. And if they don't want to face the same state, they have to return by their own means. And so we have these families now, sometimes extended families, up to 20 members, who are at the other side of the border in waiting for the husbands to come back and be reunited with the families.
So it's 300 at the moment, but I mean, there's a potential, isn't there? 1.7 million Afghans at risk here. Exactly.
So now considering there's around roughly 300,000 who already returned, let's say it's 1.4 million, right, who are still in Pakistan. And it is a huge concern for us. We have hearing also, because we're not operational in Pakistan, but we've heard from media reports, from other organization reports, that there's these detention centers, right, who are being created everywhere. So we are really fearing that there will be a really rising number of deportation, including within these people, some who flee in search of safety in Pakistan with international protection concerns and who cannot be forced back to return to Afghanistan.
Let's look at it from the government of Pakistan's point of view. I mean, they say that the main reason for this is security concerns. They say that 14 out of 24 terrorist attacks in the country were carried out by Afghans and that the people here are living in the country illegally.
So in there, I think there's some political dynamics, right, that I will not go into. But as a humanitarian organization, what really concerns us is that these Afghan people are really in a desperate situation. For some of them, so they all spoke of the experience of harassment, of arrest or abuse in Pakistan and during the journey back to Afghanistan. There's been also some reports of houses and settlement being demolished. So they're effectively being forced back to Afghanistan when there hasn't been any, evidence or proof or cases made against them. We're talking about 1,400,000 people here.
You say it's difficult to get into that issue. I understand that. But can you put pressure on the government at all in Pakistan to change its policy?
So this absolutely, and this is one of our main demands for the international community. We do need their support in advocating with the government of Pakistan to stop returning forcibly Afghans to Afghanistan. As you know, Afghanistan is not a safe country to return to for them. And the UNHCR, so the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, has maintained a non-return advisory to Afghanistan. So that means that the country is not safe to return to for its people. Many who have fled with really severe risk and severe concerns for their own safety, and were in the process of submitting an asylum claim, for example, waiting for resettlement in third countries.
And just briefly, it's not just Pakistan, is it? There have been similar moves in Iran, for example.
Yes, exactly. Iran, but also other countries. So for us, it's also the moment to really re-urge, let's say, all hosting countries to continue to provide protection and refuge to vulnerable Afghans until conditions are conducive for them to return. And at this time, they're not conducive, and the returns are forced, as you just said. So it's against the principle of non-refoulement, and they are definitely not voluntary, safe, and dignified return, which should be the norm.
Good to talk to you on the programme today. Thanks very much for joining us. That's Manon Radosta from the Danish Refugee Council, talking just there from Kabul. Thanks.